Well, it may be winter now, but spring is just around the corner. And to prepare our garden, we brought in our resident plant expert, Chris Burt, for this week's Planting Palmetto. And we're going to be talking all about pruning.
Correct.
All right, so where do we even begin with pruning? What is it for those who don't know?
So pruning is a very important cultural practice, and it just means that we are removing living tissue off the plant. So you're cutting limbs, removing leaves, things like that. The entire concept of pruning is we're trying to optimize the overall health of the plant. And when we're pruning, we're not trying to stunt anything, we're not trying to change anything, we're trying to improve its growth and of course improve its health.
What about the tools we need to do this?
So there's a lot of different tools that you need, but in reality, the most basic tool that you will ever need, and this is of course hand pruners, also known as sucketeers, 100 different names. But in reality, a good pair of sucketeers are essential for any gardener. In fact, I would kind of compare these to a chef's knife.
Okay.
So it's worth the investment. Don't go out and buy a cheap pair. Buy yourself a good pair. This way, you have a quality pair that you're going to use because you want to make sure they're sharp. You want to make sure they're clean, because you don't want to do too much damage when you're making these cuts on the plant.
So does everything need pruning?
No, not everything needs pruning, and timing is of course essential for pruning as well. So one of the big things to kind of keep in mind is, what are you pruning? And if you don't know what you're pruning, kind of put away the pruners. You don't need to do it if you don't know. But if you know it's going to be blooming soon, so a lot of spring bloomers, things like azaleas, spireas, forsythias, those are ones you're going to wait until after they're done blooming. And then certain plants like hydrangeas actually are going to bloom on last year's wood, so you also want to wait until they're done blooming. But pretty much everything else, especially a lot of our trees and shrubs, this is the perfect time to prune, because when you prune, you're encouraging new growth. And of course, what is spring going to bring about but new growth?
Okay, we're about to get a demonstration from the expert.
Of course.
All right, show us how it's done.
All right, so the first thing you really need to do whenever you're talking about pruning is first understand the plant. Second is to know, why are you pruning? If you don't know why you're pruning, again, kind of the same concept. We don't have to prune. Pruning is just to optimize what we're doing. And so if you don't know why, don't do anything. But once you kind of understand why, which you know, whether it's to shape it, whether to kind of improve the health, then you start to go through and you want to look at the overall structure. And so you look at the plant, walk around it several times, especially if it's in the ground, and then you want to start to go through and figure out what branches are going to be removed, kind of what size do you want it to eventually be, and then you start addressing, all right, where are these actual cuts going to be? One of the first things you have to understand about a limb is, of course, there's two parts of a branch. You're going to have what's known as a node, and then you're going to have the space between those nodes. The node is where the growth point is. Usually if you look at a stem, you'll see almost like scars, usually a little bit of a swollen bud on there. Those are the nodes. That's the growing points, and so you always want to make sure you address those, because you're cutting right above that.
Okay.
There's two types of cuts, of course. You've got your heading cuts. That means that you're taking a branch down, also known as a reduction cut. That just means you're cutting the branch in half, usually kind of like creating a hedge. The other type is called thinning cuts, also known as removal cuts, and that's where you're actually removing branches inside the canopy. And this actually will open up the canopy, allow more sunlight, and allow more airflow within the canopy. And it's a really important pruning technique specifically for the health of the plant. And so if you are doing a lot of heading cuts, it's a good idea to thin them out every once in a while to allow that sunlight to then penetrate that canopy once more. It's not as distinct when you do thinning cuts, but it is much better overall for the health.
Okay, anything you really want to show us to make sure, maybe what should we not be doing?
So really the biggest thing is if you recognize this plant, this is an azalea. And so I, of course, wanted to get a plant that had very swollen buds to kind of demonstrate on, but azaleas, of course, would be a big no-no. But the big thing to look for is the 3 Ds, which is dead, diseased, or damaged. And so if I have a branch that's broken, if I have a branch that's dead, you can see them on there. You want to go ahead and start making those cuts first. Generally, you're going to angle a little bit on that cut. The other thing I'm going to do is any crossing branches. And so I'm going to select crossing branches that I'm going to then remove as I open up that canopy. And when you open up that canopy again, see crossing branches here, The biggest thing is don't go too severe. That's
Okay.
really my big recommendation is if you miss a cut, that's not a big deal. It's much better to do less than more. The biggest thing with pruning is just, again, when you walk away, you should feel like that plant looks and just feels a little bit better.
Anything else we should be doing now in February? Feels like the dead of winter, but what else should we be doing to prepare our garden for spring?
In reality, there's a whole lot to start doing. And so one of the biggest things I like to start doing is kind of the cleaning method of just removing any dead debris. A lot of the things that I encourage you overwintering, a lot of your dead perennials, leave them there really until spring comes. Now that spring's almost here, then you start to clean things up. You start to remove a lot of those dead materials, and you start to, of course, add some compost to the garden. Not fertilizer yet, it's still a little too early, but you want to start addressing your soil health that we discussed previously. You want to start feeding that soil because that'll help liven things a lot quicker. And then, of course, kind of pay attention to what plants are emerging first. And of course, address any issues as they emerge. So if you see a plant like this and you notice, man, half the plant doesn't have any buds on it or doesn't have any new leaves on it, that's an indication there's something wrong. And then, of course, that's where you would start to address it. The other thing is do any of your planting now. It's still cool enough. Get things in the ground, whether it's shrubs, trees. You're still early enough. You want to do it long before the heat of the winter or heat of the summer.
Amazing. Chris, thank you so much for all of this. Don't forget to prepare your garden for spring.
Yeah.